Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. Darkness prevails here. I was putting this script together and I realized I'm super in the mood for more hunting stories. So if you've gone hunting and you've seen or encountered something messed up or unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. For now, enjoy these stories, featuring a daunting series of terrifying events in the Ozarks, a demonic spirit that steals faces, and a wampus cat that kills repeatedly. Before we start, did you know you could be listening to this show and all EerieCast shows without any ads, get access to bonus stories, and unlock horror audiobooks you've never heard before? That's right, and all you gotta do is go to eerie.fm and become a premium member to support what we do. That's eerie.fm, EERIE.fm. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Bigfoot wanted to kill me. From Anonymous. I had a double date at a Colton Steakhouse. A friend of mine told me about this podcast, so I checked it out. Cool stuff you've got here. That same friend thinks I should send you my story as well, so here goes. I should say at the start that this is the only time I've ever encountered something unexplained. I'm really just an insurance salesman. That's what I did most of my life until my back gave out, and I got disability. But back when I did work, my whole trade was a matter of teaching people that the thing they lay awake fearing at night was not likely to come for them, and I would show them a table of figures to prove it. Donna, my wife, believes most of what gets sent to programs like this one comes from dudes who saw a bear in poor light and wanted, for once in their lives, to be the one the night had chosen. I held that view myself, up until the spring before last. I'll go ahead and tell my story, and you make of it what you will. I'm not going to beg you to believe me or anything, but I do thank you for listening. The place is up in the Ozarks here in Arkansas. I know when I'm there because my phone gives out a few miles before the road does. Then from there you're on foot. I've hunted those grounds since my father first carried me up there when I was 11 or so. It's national forest on the map, but there's a shelf of it that nobody troubles with, since the road into the bottom of it washed away sometime in the 90s. The county, I guess, never saw fit to mend it. To reach the shelf, you leave the truck at the foot of an old logging cut and climb a ridge that takes the better part of an hour when you're loaded down with a blind and a cooler and a pack that runs close to 40 pounds. No one's gonna do that for turkey when there's easy turkey down in the river bottoms. A man can just park beside his bird, really. So the shelf here was mine, year after year, and that was perfect. I hunt with a bow. I'm aware that it can be odd to hunt turkey with a bow. The short of how I came to it is that my father shot, and I shot alongside him as a boy. But after he passed, there came a time when the idea of a gun hunting turkey sat wrong with me. It's not an anti-gun or animal rights thing, but more like hunting. If I wasn't hunting with and for my dad, then, my mind told me, I should be hunting for the love of the game. And a bow would be a happy little medium between shooting a gun and strangling a bird with my bare hands. Before I had that thought, I remember taking up a bow in the backyard, doing some target training, giving my hands something to do in the evenings. When one season I thought, maybe I should just carry this into the woods, leave my gun in the truck. So I bought a ground blind to hide the draw, and I've been doing it like this ever since. It's harder work, yeah, but I think that's a lot of the reason why I love it so much. A turkey can catch you blinking at 40 yards, they say, and a bow requires a long pull to bring it to full draw. So you sit folded up inside a little nylon box with the windows let down to slits, and you keep as still as you possibly can. When your moment comes, you have about a second to draw, while the bird has its head behind a trunk or buried in the grass. There's more tactics to this, timing, even skill. I've spent whole weekends on that shelf without sending a single arrow. That's the bargain. But when you do bag a bird, there's so much more satisfaction to it. Anyway, I know that shelf and the land there like the back of my own hand. I know how it should sound at every hour of every night. I'm not the kind of guy that would mistake a barred owl for some sort of strange creature, or to be turned around in the dark by a deer stamping and blowing at me. I've slept up there on my own more nights than I could put a number to, and in the last 2 decades, the worst I've ever encountered was a copperhead that found its way into my boot somehow. That's a different story. Beyond that, the scariest thing in the Ozarks are the spreading ticks. Nowadays, you gotta worry about alpha-gal syndrome. Thanks, Bill Gates. That spring, I drove up on a Thursday. The weekend was supposed to turn wet, and I wanted the dry days for myself, so I went up early. I had a new tent I'd been wanting to try, one of the ones that's supposed to pop up in a couple of minutes, if you know what you're doing, and I figured I'd get the kinks out before it rained. I parked at the logging cut, loaded up, and started up the ridge. It was a good climb that morning. The dogwoods were blooming. About 2/3 of the way up, there's a flat where a creek crosses the trail, and I stopped there to eat a sandwich, listening to nature for a while. Off across the next ridge, I could hear a tom gobbling on the roost. That got me fired up. I made the rest of the climb feeling about as good as I get these days. I set up camp where I always do, back in this little stand of cedars where the ground is flat and the wind can't get at you. Nobody down below can see you up there. I've got an old fire ring there from all my years using the spot, too. I put the tent up, got my bedroll laid out. I hung up a food bag off a limb a good ways from where I'd be sleeping. You've got to do that, unless you want your face munched on by a bear. Then I walked out to look around while I had light. Down the slope a ways, I found fresh scratching in the leaves where a flock had been working through, and there were droppings, the J-shaped kind that tells you there's a tom. And down at the creek, I found a couple of tracks in the mud as wide as my hand. That put me in an even better mood. I set my blind in a pocket of brush at the edge of a clearing. I was hoping they would come through there at first light, so I laid out a hen decoy and a jake. Then I walked back to camp. That evening, I cooked supper and turned in early. The thing is, you've got to be in the blind before the birds come off the roost, so that means you're walking out there in pitch dark. The first night, there was nothing. I slept fine and heard the usual. One time, I heard coyotes, off toward the river somewhere. They were yipping about something, but not too close, so whatever. There was an owl, too, near the creek. I woke up a couple of times, restless on the hard ground, my first night out, but that's pretty normal. Every time I just laid there listening. Nothing out of the ordinary, and I dropped back off. Friday morning I killed a bird. It was about the best morning of hunting I've had in years. I was in the blind before daylight. The woods woke up around me a piece at a time. A cardinal first, then crows somewhere down the slope, and then the toms cut loose up on the roost. 3 of them at least, and close. My heart was beating fast. I was excited. I gave them a couple of soft tree yelps on my mouth call. Nothing big. Just a hen letting them know she's down here and she's interested. One of them about lost his mind over it. When they pitched down off the limb, I could hear their wings, heavy slapping turkey wings. He came into my decoys all strutted up, fan out, dragging his wingtips in the dirt, drumming at the jake. Then he hung up just shy of range and stayed there. I had to sit there and wait him out. My legs were killing me at the time. I had a cramp coming on in my left foot that I couldn't do a thing about. But he finally broke and came on in to take it up with that jake decoy. When he stopped behind the hen, I lost sight of his head, so I started to draw, and when he cleared, I put the arrow right through him. He ran about 10 yards and dropped. It was a big bird, beard pushing 11 inches, spurs as big as your thumb. I went and got him, carrying him back up to camp, and I was happy enough to whistle a tune. I cleaned the bird at camp. I'm careful about that on account of bears, even though I've never actually laid eyes on one up here. Just sign and old signs at that. The parts I wasn't keeping, the guts and all, I carried way off, down the back side of the shelf to a little gully, a few hundred yards from where I slept. My dad had always drilled it into me, you don't leave that mess near your bed. Then I washed up in the creek, bagged my meat, and hung it in the shade in the cooler bag. I ate a good lunch, I'd earned it after all, and I laid down in the sun a while. It was a fine day. That afternoon, I walked back down to the gully, figuring I'd make sure I hadn't left anything that might bring something right up to the trail to me. The guts were gone, though. Now, that's nothing strange on its own. Crows, coyotes, possums, just about anything will clean that up inside an hour. And it had been a few hours. But it wasn't tore up and dragged around, which is what a critter would have done to it. There's always a mess after, feathers worked loose and a drag mark in the leaves. But there wasn't any of that. It was just gone, like someone had bent down and picked it clean. The leaves around there were barely even disturbed. One dark smear on a flat rock, and that was it. I stood there a moment, told myself I was reading too much into it. Then I walked on back up. That evening, I sat by my little fire and ate. The light came down through the cedars, all gold and then red, and the woods went quiet right at dark, the little hush before things in the night crank up. I tried calling Donna on the off chance I had reception, but there's really never signal up there. So when that didn't work out, I sat with my coffee and watched the fire. I remember being so at peace at the time, having the thought that I should really do this more, that I'd let too much time stack up between these trips. What with my dad gone and the boys grown up, so I made myself promise to do it some more. It was starting to get cold after that, so I put the fire out and drowned it, stirring the ashes and drowned it again. I then crawled into my tent. I couldn't tell you what time it was when I woke up. I never checked. But what woke me up was a sound. The sound was a knocking, one single knock, on wood. It came from down the slope below me somewhere. It sounded like a big limb when it falls and catches another limb, except a falling limb keeps going until it hits the ground. It crashes and tumbles. It doesn't just knock and quit. This was one solid knock, followed by nothing else. I laid there. I wasn't scared just yet, just curious. I was awake and listening, telling myself it was a deer knocking a dead branch loose. Maybe some rotten snag finally let go. I had the bag pulled up to my chin, and I could feel the cold coming up off the ground through the pad. While I was laying there thinking about things, it came again. A knock, coming from a different spot, off to the left now of where the first one was. It was as if whatever had done it before had moved on over in between. And then, a good while after, long enough for me to talk myself back to going to sleep, a third one that came from up above the camp, on the high side, where there's nothing but a cedar thicket and the bald top of the ridge. Somebody would have had to climb up around the whole camp to start making sounds up there, and they had to have done it quietly, since I never heard a step, and I'm a bit of a light sleeper. I lay in that tent with my eyes open in the dark. I started to focus on my breathing, making sure it was doubly quiet, so I could hear better, and also to make sure that I couldn't be heard. But there was nothing else. I didn't hear footsteps or any more knocks after that. Just those three, spread out over what might have been maybe half an hour, each one from its own spot. It had made a sort of circle around me. I told myself it was three separate limbs coming down, even though that was kind of silly. But what it really sounded like was something walking the edge of my camp in the dark, rapping on a tree every so often, like a fella going down a hall knocking on doors. When the sun was starting to come up, I got up, and with the sun up, I felt like a fool. I made my coffee and got my gear, then I went and sat in my blind for the morning. That's what I drove 3 hours and climbed an hour to do. I wasn't about to let a couple of weird noises run me off. And you know what? I killed my second bird that morning. It wasn't the pretty hunt the first one was. I wasn't all the way into it, thinking a bit too much about the night before. I kept catching myself looking back over my shoulder out the rear window of the blind, instead of watching the decoys. A couple of times I about missed birds moving out front on account of it. This one came in quiet, no gobbling at all, just kind of showed up at the edge of the clearing already close, which a tom might do sometimes when he's spooky or wore out running hens, and I almost didn't get a shot. But I got it, and I made it good. And that was my second longbeard. 2 of them with a bow on public land. I ought to have been on top of the world. Instead, I felt wore out. There was something sitting in the back of my head I couldn't get to settle. And packing that second bird up to camp, I was already chewing on whether I even wanted to spend another night up there, or just pack out a day early. I cleaned the second bird, carried the guts off the other way this time, away from that gully, so I wouldn't have a reason to go back to it. I hung the meat, washed up. I was sitting there at my fire ring in the middle of the afternoon, broad daylight, sun coming down warm through the cedars, when I saw the arrow. It was one of mine. I knew it right off the bat. It was my fletching. My nocks are orange, so I can find a shaft down in the leaves easily. It was standing straight up out of the ground, at the edge of my camp, a few steps from the tent. The broadhead was driven down in the dirt, so it stood up on its own with the shaft pointing at the sky. Not a mark on it either. Now, I always count my arrows. My dad beat that into me when I was a kid. Count your arrows. I'd carried 12 up that ridge. I'd put 2 into 2 birds and pulled both of them, and they were in my pack, since you don't leave a broadhead laying out in the woods. So, not counting the 2 I had in my pack, I should have 10 in my quiver. I went and counted them again to be sure. I was taken aback. There were only 9 in my quiver, but the one in the ground made 10. I pulled it up out of the dirt and held on to it. I counted all my arrows in their separate spots over and over again to make sure I wasn't going mad. It came out the same every time. One of mine had come out of that quiver, gone into the ground a few steps from my tent, and I had not done it. The only stretch it could have happened was the hour or so I was off dumping guts and down at the creek washing up, with my bow leaned against the cooler, my back turned. That's when it hit me. Cold went all the way down through my belly. I stood there in the middle of the woods, with a chill going down my spine. Something or someone had come into my camp in broad daylight, slid one of my own arrows from my quiver, stood it up in the dirt where I'd be sure to find it, and they somehow never made a sound. I should have packed up right then and right there. A smarter man would have. A smarter man would have walked right off the mountain with 2 birds and a good scare. I stood there with that arrow in my hand, and I came up with excuses not to leave. That I had miscounted, or I had dropped one just right, that it had stood up from the ground. But not one of those holds if you sit with it, even for a moment. There's no other hunter on that shelf. I'd have seen some boot prints, his trash, something to give him away. An arrow doesn't stand itself up in the dirt with no mark on it. And I don't miscount my arrows. Never. My dad made sure of that when I was a boy. But I wanted to stay. Again, I'd driven all the way out here and climbed all that way, and I'd killed 2 good birds already. Some stubborn part of me wouldn't let a few noises and a trick with an arrow run me off my own spot. So I put the arrow back in the quiver, making 10 again. And I told myself I would decide in the morning. The rest of that afternoon, nothing happened. I sat by the fire and I owned my broadheads. I ate early since I figured I'd want to be zipped in before dark. The whole time I kept catching myself turning a little sideways on the log, so I had the tree line in the corner of my eye. I would notice I was doing it, and I'd feel like a fool, even though I was alone, and I'd force myself to face the fire again. But a few minutes after that, I'd be turned around once more. You ever watch a dog stand at the screen door, growling low at the yard, even when there's nothing to see? That was me. The woods just sat there as normal as ever, but at that point in time, I hated it. It clearly wasn't normal out there, and I clearly was not truly alone. Right at dusk, the sounds of the woods faded away. Even the bugs wound down, and I sat there in silence, knowing that something was coming. I've spent enough nights in the timber to know what that usually means, that there's something moving through that even the bugs don't like. Could be an owl coming off its roost or a bobcat. But what you do is you wait a few minutes, and you see if it passes on. If it does, you'll hear the bugs crank on up. So I waited. I sat with my supper going cold in my hands, and I waited for the woods to come back to me. But they did not come back. It stayed quiet for so long. It felt like sitting there by the fire in pitch-black darkness otherwise might be a mistake. Like the fire was going to give me away. Like everything could see me, and I could see nothing. So instead of stoking the fire or lighting it back up, I let it burn out. And when it did, I sat there in the dark, letting my eyes come around, eventually. After several minutes, I was able to make out the tree line somewhat, and the pale hump of my tent, but not really much else. But that's when the knock came back. It came from the tree line right at the edge of camp, closer than the night before. I was wide awake and stone sober this time. There was no talking myself out of it. And this time I knew the exact spot it came from. I was looking darn near straight at it too. After the knocks, there came a sound I would only call huffing. Long, quick draws of air, like a big, exasperated animal. But it was coming from much higher off the ground than a four-legged creature, or even a man for that matter. I didn't move. Another knock came, off to my right. My company had moved, and just like before, it had moved without a sound. A good 20 feet across dry cedar litter that pops if a chipmunk crosses it. And yet, it was moving through it as if it were levitating. I've hunted this region my whole life. I can hear a squirrel change his mind in a tree at 60 yards. This thing crossed open ground so close to me that I should have heard every step, should have heard its arm moving and shifting as it walked. But I didn't. It was like it was in one spot and then another, with no in-between whatsoever. I crouched low, and I got in my tent. I sat down with the bow laid across my lap. A bow is about the most useless thing in the world inside a nylon tent in pitch dark. You can't draw it in there, not enough room, and you're not going to aim it if you did, not in pitch darkness. But I had to have something at that time to make me feel safe, or at least make me feel like I had an action I could take. The knocking outside kept going. It was going around the tent, all the way around, not stopping at just 3, like the last night. There would be a knock to my left, followed by a long wait, then one up behind my head, and a longer wait, then one out past my feet. And every wait in between lasted a different amount of time. Whatever was making those noises was doing it steady and slow. I don't think I've ever met an animal with that kind of patience, sometimes staying dead quiet 10 to 15 minutes each stretch, just long enough to let me think that maybe it had left me alone. But then the knock would come again, keeping my heart and mind on edge. It had all night. This was its domain, whatever it was, and I was an uninvited guest. The worst happened in the middle of the night. There was a knock to my left, then quick, way too quick, an answer off to my right, both very close. These two had no gap in between. I lay there with that bow on my chest now, realizing I was no longer dealing with just one thing out there. There was at least 2 of them. I was outnumbered. And then one of them came up to my tent. I didn't hear it approach. I never even heard it move, but I felt the ground shift. If you've ever laid on the bare dirt while something or someone heavy walks nearby, there's a kind of vibration that comes up through the ground and to your back, and you don't have to hear a single footfall. I felt that. Then another, closer. Something setting its weight down a step at a time, coming towards me. I heard the huffing again, but it was no longer in the tree line. It was right by my head, just outside the tent. The thinnest fabric mankind has ever devised separated me from something that sounded like it could rip me in half. I lay there with my eyes open, trying not to breathe. I could hear it leaning towards me, the tent wall pressed in against my shoulder. Just barely. I wasn't sure yet if it was its face, or a hand, or I don't know what, but even the poles began to creak a hair under it. Then it stopped and stayed like that, leaning on the tent over me, breathing, probably smelling me through the wall. I noticed its smell then too. The worst animal reek you could ever imagine. Like if you piled up roadkill for an hour that you found on the highway and brought it home to microwave for 10 minutes straight. Eventually, it eased its weight back off, slow as it had come, and a good minute later, a knock cracked out from the tree line, once again distant enough. I've never in my life, before or since, come as close to just dying of fright as I did with that wall touching my shoulder. I really think if it had pushed on through, I probably would have died right there. My heart wouldn't take it. After that, I gave up trying to track where they were, and just shook. I prayed too. I'm not usually a praying man, and the words came out a mess, but I said them, and I said them out loud. I thought about Donna. She would probably be sleeping 40 miles away from where I was, and I was reminded I would not be able to call her until I left. Matter of fact, nobody alive knew which mountain I was on, let alone which shelf. I'd kept this spot to myself so well for decades. I was proud of it, until right then. Now I was regretting my secrecy. God, she'd give me till Sunday before she did anything about this, and a day past that before she actually called the authorities. And on top of all that, nobody would know where to start. I lay in the dark with all that stacked up in my mind, and I had to force it out if I wanted any sleep or peace. The knocking continued for most of the night. At some point, the knocking spaced further and further apart, and they finally stopped. But even then I did not feel content or relieved, so I lay there still shaking, waiting for any noise at all. There would be no sleep. The rest of the night was an exhausted blur, but eventually I heard birds. The woods had come back alive. I finally felt safe enough to move again, and the first thing I did was reach up to my shoulder to where that thing had touched me through the tent wall, like I was going to find some mark or stain. I sat there for a little while longer before I worked up the nerve to put my hand on the zipper. I kept imagining it, still out there, waiting for me to open up. When I finally did it, I did it fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid, and I jumped out, half falling, honestly, with my head swinging left and right to catch any sign of movement. But there was nothing to be seen. My camp was empty, the fire pit was still cold, and the sun beamed through the cedar trees. Whatever those things were, they had walked off and left me for the morning. But I soon realized they'd left messages. The rocks in my fire ring were moved. They hadn't been knocked aside or rooted out by some animal after some grease, like a bear might do, but they had been moved deliberately. For the good part of several years they'd been in a circle, but now they set into a long, curved line, the open side toward my tent. These were larger rocks. I'd have heard them moving around or a man grunting and dragging those, but I had not heard anything, despite being up all night. Yet there they were, in their new, glorious shape. Then I saw my decoys. I'd staked them down at the clearing by the blind, a good 200 yards off and down the slope from here. But both of them were standing in my camp at that very moment. Something had pulled them and carried them up through the dark, and knew to press their stakes into the dirt to make them stand up. It even made them face my tent door, the hen and the Jake, both waiting to greet me as I walked out. I started to look for tracks. If a couple of intruders had decided to invade my campsite, then I would find proof of them being here beyond just them moving things around. The ground around the tent was scuffed up pretty bad. Leaf litter kicked and pressed down in big patches. But the one clear footprint I found was in the soft black dirt at the edge of the fire ring, where I'd splashed my dishwater the evening before. It was definitely a footprint, a bare foot. But my God, it was huge. I've got size 12 boots, but it was longer than my boot by a full hand's length and nearly twice as wide across the ball. 5 toes spread out and dug in deep. The heel had sunk deep into the mud under some real weight. I put my own boot down next to it, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. My size 12 looked like a child's beside it. My mouth hung open. A bear track you'd know. A man's track you would certainly know. But this was shaped like a stretched-out man's foot, built like nothing that ought to be walking around the Ozarks on 2 legs. And it had been standing right there at the edge of my fire. What in the hell was it? I didn't stand there long. A knock came down from the high side of the shelf above the camp, and another answered it from off in the trees. Then a third from somewhere down the slope, down toward the trail, the only trail, which was the way I had to walk to get to my truck. They had never left. They'd gone quiet and waited me out, my worst fears realized. Now they were spread around the top of that mountain, talking to each other, and one of them was on my way down. I jammed my tent in the pack half-folded, and I grabbed my 2 birds. I wasn't leaving without my birds. I don't care how scared of a man I was. Then I threw on my pack, and I started down. The trail off that shelf switchbacks through oaks for the first stretch. It was steep with loose rock. I went down it fast, with 40 pounds on my back. I kept my head turning, watching the trees on both sides. But then the knocking started up again, behind me. A knock up from where I'd come from, then one off to my left, lower and closer to my level. They were coming down with me, or maybe after me. But they weren't running. I didn't hear anything crashing through the brush. Just knocks and something keeping pace. They moved so silently before, but not now. Not when they wanted to be heard. I never saw a single one of them on the way down. About halfway down, that smell returned, and I wanted to vomit. It took me a second to notice the wind. I was upwind, so the smell was coming from ahead of me. There was one below me now. They had me surrounded, front and back. I had to leave the trail. A bad idea most of the time, but I had to do it. Usually you stay on the trail. You don't go busting off into the country. But I wasn't walking down toward that smell, right into that thing's arms or whatever it has. So I cut hard to my right, downhill, straight through the brush toward where I knew the logging cut had to be. I would just have to keep going down. I fell almost immediately. My foot had caught on a root, and I fell hard on a rock, tearing my hand open. I've still got that scar across my palm. But I didn't stop even then. I got up and kept going, dripping with blood down my sleeve. It was then that I heard the screaming for the first time. Holy crap. That screaming was the most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my life. If the knocking and something pushing on the tent was bad, those screams were like something that hell itself concocted. Nothing natural to the forest of any part of the world screamed like that. It came from close behind me and above, and it went up and didn't stop. Even when something that size should have run out of air and stopped, it kept screaming. Every hair on my body stood up. Another scream sounded. One of those things was answering the other call. It came from off to the side, the same kind of scream. This must have been their final warning. I was not wanted here, and I had overstayed my welcome. I ran straight downhill through whatever was in front of me, be it brush or deadfall. I went over a log once, then through a greenbrier patch that opened my arms up, but somehow I didn't even feel it until much later. My pack kept slamming into my back over and over. The birds were swinging about wildly, and the whole time I could hear those things coming. They were crashing through the woods now. No more careful quiet. Multiple huge, heavy things were coming right for me. Things so big and so fast. I knew if they wanted me, if they really wanted me dead, I would have already been dead. They were driving me, like a dog herding sheep. I burst out of the timber so fast I nearly ran past my own truck. I threw the door open and threw the pack in, tossing those two birds along with it. I jumped inside and locked the doors, like that was going to do anything against things this big. I grabbed the steering wheel, getting blood all over it from my palm, and I peeled out of there, tossing gravel behind me. I looked side to side, front and back, through each of my mirrors. But as I drove away, I saw nothing come out of those trees. That was the last time I ever visited my shelf. I never went back there. Decades I'd hunted that shelf, and I'd never heard or encountered anything like that. But all it takes is one time, and I got the message. I was not welcome there. That's my story. I'm sorry if the ending is sort of abrupt, but that's the difference between real life and horror fiction. I got away, learned my lesson, and now I'm sharing that story with you. Again, you don't have to believe me. It's your call. And if you're really wondering what my opinion is and what I think it was, what I think they were, you probably already know the answer. I think it was Bigfoot. Probably a family of Bigfoot, or Sasquatches. I'm not sure what the difference is if there is one. But nothing else makes sense. Was there a family of giant people out there trying to warn me away without a single human word? Or was it the famous cryptid? Who knows? But I ain't going back. You couldn't pay me enough to go back. Thanks for listening. This episode is sponsored by ZocDoc. Raise your hand if you've got a doctor's appointment you've been putting off. Mine has been sitting on my list so long I've actively started pretending it's not there. My usual move when something feels off is 30 seconds of internet searching, 45 seconds of panic, then a final convincing speech to myself that it's probably fine. That strategy has worked 0 times. This year I'll be using ZocDoc instead. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love. With more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states and over 200 specialties, you can search by specialty or symptom, browse thousands of verified patient reviews, and book a real-time appointment that often happens within 24 to 72 hours. If you've been doing the search and spiral thing like I have, ZocDoc is exactly what I'd use. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/unexplained to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/unexplained. 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 Thanks, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this message. The Face Wearer, from Scary Gab J. So, my entire life I've had paranormal experiences. I come from a long line of witches, some of whom were or are very powerful, and some who do lots of baneful magic. I could sit here all day and send you ghost stories, but I'll settle for this one today. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I lived in a super creepy 2-bedroom house with my mom, dad, and siblings. We found many weird things outside, including human bones at one point. When my sister and I found these bones, my dad said to put them back exactly where we found them, and to not touch them again. I always had a hard time sleeping. I would be up all night some nights. One night, all my siblings were sleeping, mostly on the top bunk, and I was on the bottom bunk with just one of my sisters. I was up as usual, alone. I think it was around 2 or 3 a.m. I was just laying in bed. Out of nowhere, my dad walks into the doorway of my room and motions his hand for me to come with him. He didn't utter a word, literally just motioned his hand at me. So I got up and went with him to the couch. In my living room, we had a couch and a love seat. My dad sat on the couch and motioned with his hand, patting the couch for me to sit next to him. Again, he wasn't saying a word. We sat there and I watched TV with him in complete silence. The entire time I was watching the TV, my dad was not watching it. Instead, he was staring straight at me. I noticed his eyes did not reflect any light. They were black, pitch black. I did not see any white in his eyes at all the entire time, and I had a very weird, uneasy feeling, like something was very wrong with him. I tried my hardest not to look at him the whole time, but I could see him from the corner of my eye. At one point, he even put his hand on my knee, something he did not usually do. I stayed there next to him for about half an hour, watching the TV. Eventually, I said I wanted to sit on the love seat. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. Then I moved. I ended up sitting out there, feeling creeped out, like something just wasn't right, for another 10 minutes. Finally, I told him that I wanted to go back to bed. My dad again didn't say a word. He sat there silently, motioning for me to come and give him a hug, which I did. He even kissed me on the cheek while I hugged him. He felt very, very cold, not at all a normal human temperature. After that, I went into the hallway. In that hallway, my room and my parents' room were right across from each other. So instead of going to my room, I went the opposite way to my parents' room, just to see if my dad was sleeping. He was. Him and my mother were both in their bed, sleeping. I stared at both of them for a minute before turning away. But standing before me now, blocking the doorway of my parents' room, was the face-wearing entity. It was leaning forward, staring straight into my eyes, only 2 to 3 inches from my face. Its eyes were huge and black, and literally for about 30 seconds, it stood just like that, leaning forward, staring at me, not saying anything, not even blinking. I was so scared, I couldn't bring myself to move or speak. After the most uncomfortable time, it straightened up, showing that it was taller than my dad. My dad is about 6 feet tall, but the way it stood, it was probably closer to 7 feet. It then walked away, heading towards the kitchen, which you need to walk through the living room to get to. I hurried back to my room and forced myself to go to sleep. I didn't have any more experiences like that until years later. I was about 10 years old, and we had moved to a bigger apartment. My grandmother was over babysitting me one day. Inside my parents' bedroom was this huge bathroom. They also had a computer in their room. So I walked out of my parents' bathroom and saw my grandmother using the computer. Like literally the screen was on, and I could hear her typing away on the keyboard. So, not thinking twice about it, I was about to walk out. When I got to the doorway, I stopped in my tracks, because I could see right in front of me my grandmother was sleeping on the couch. Once I saw her there, of course I looked over, and there that thing was again. The same thing that I'd seen pretending to be my dad was now pretending to be my grandmother. It was standing next to me, leaning forward once more, staring straight into my eyes. This lasted for about 15 seconds. Again, it had these huge, pure black eyes. It then turned away, sitting back into the computer chair. It went right back onto the computer, typing at the keyboard. I walked out of the room, and I stayed out for maybe 2 minutes, staying next to my sleeping grandmother. But I did go back into the room, only to find that no one was there. I've never seen this thing again, and to this day I don't know why it chose to show itself to me, or what its motivation was. But it's something that has stuck with me very vividly ever since. Cryptid Connection from Appalachian Princess. The stories I'm about to tell you happened in 2 different decades. One happened in the early 60s to my great-grandpa on my mother's side, who lived in the valley. And the other happened in the late 80s to my grandpa on my dad's side, who lived on the mountain. 2 different stories, but I think they're about the same creature. I'm not sure of the exact years they happened, so I'll do the best I can. I'll tell you what happened and then my opinion. Please let me know what you think. When my great-grandpa built his house in the mid to late 50s, he made what he thought was a good decision to make sure the house was slightly higher up, in the case he had to work on water pipes or some such. Then he wouldn't have to belly crawl. Instead, he could simply crawl on all 4s and sit up to work on anything under the house. The door that led to underneath the house was right under his room at the back of the house. You could look out his window and see the backyard and right up the hill behind the house. At the time, there were trees on the hill back there, and you couldn't see much through them. Of course, those trees are gone now. Back then, there were no streetlights or anything up there, so it was super dark. In the late 60s, there were some incidents where some people's pets were attacked or even killed. When I asked one lady about it, her eyes got really big, and she simply said, "I really don't want to talk about it, honey. We try not to think about that thing." During this time, my grandpa had a little dog he would go squirrel hunting with. He would bring the dog outside and let him run up in the woods, while my grandpa would sit in the swing in the backyard, listening to that dog bark at them. That dog was not an inside dog, and he wasn't an outside dog either. So if Papa hollered for the dog to come back inside, and he didn't come back at night, Papa would just head on to bed, and the dog would come sometime in the morning. It would go in and eat and head right back out. So according to my grandpa, he had been working on putting lime under the house for mold, and he noticed there was a leak under there from the bathroom. So he had to fix that and left that door open so he could check it later, making sure it wasn't still dripping. When it got dark, Papa hollered for his dog, but the dog did not come. So Papa just went on to bed. At around 2 or 3 a.m., there was a loud commotion that woke Papa right up, pretty much jolting him awake and startling him. He said what he heard next broke his heart. The commotion was crazy, he said. He heard that little old dog not yelping, but screaming. He said he'd never heard a dog scream like that. He grabbed his pistol and a flashlight and ran out the back of the house to that door that led under the house. By the time he got to the door, it had already gone quiet, and he knew that little dog was dead. He said he couldn't hear or see anything at first. Then he knew there was something wrong. There was something else under the house, and it was growling at him. He could smell it too. He said it was one of the worst smells he'd ever smelled before. The way he put it to me was like rotting meat and wet dog. He said he braved it and got down and started crawling under the house, shining the flashlight to see what he could see. He said he could hear it breathing and realized it was very close. What happened next happened in about 10 seconds. He moved the flashlight to his left, and all he saw was black fur and big green eye shine run past him. Papa screamed and then retched. The smell was so concentrated and awful, he couldn't help it. Papa back then was part of the fire department. He had seen and smelled some rough stuff, to say the least. He said he sat there for a few minutes and collected himself, and he got to thinking. He couldn't leave that little dog under there. So he went and got what he said was left of it. He didn't want my granny to see that. He wanted to bury the dog, and he would tell her what happened when he went back in. The whole time he was burying the poor dog, he knew that thing was watching him. After all, he could still smell it. When he went inside, my granny was standing there, and she was scared to death. He told her what happened, and finally started to cry for his dog. The next morning when he went outside, his neighbor had come out. Papa went over and told him what had happened. Apparently, he had not been the only one that night who had a pet attacked or killed. According to the neighbor, earlier in the night, a lady on the road across from my papa almost lost her little dog to something. She had been out on the porch, smoking, and she had her dog on a leash. She said suddenly she smelled this terrible smell and began to hear growling. The little dog actually began to shake and tremble and peed itself while running to the porch. She said they went into the house and she heard all this commotion on her front porch, something scratching and growling. Papa said there were actually deep scratches on her door when he went to check. This went on for a few nights in a row, but just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. There was quite a bit of speculation as to what it was. Could be a mountain lion, a coyote. Someone even said it might have been a small bear, but my papa doesn't believe that. He said it was bigger than a coyote, and he had never seen a mountain lion or a bear ever look or smell like that. He never knew what it was, never found out, but he never wanted to encounter it again. He has since passed away, but he firmly believed it was no coyote, no mountain lion, no bear. Skip to the late 80s. This happened to my grandpa, my dad's dad. The man was an avid raccoon hunter, and he had some of the best coonhounds around. Grand Night Champions, UKC champions, the list goes on. We're talking some expensive and high money-making dogs in the coon hunting world. If you know, you know. For the most part, these dogs were some fearless dogs. My papa and his best buddy would take these dogs out almost every night so they could tree some raccoons. In the off-season, you can't shoot them out to the dogs, so you let them tree them and call them off to go to the next one or to go home. This particular night, he and his buddy took 4 dogs, 2 of my papa's and 2 of his buddies. These dogs were 4 of the best, some of the smartest dogs, so they get to where they're hunting and turn the dogs out. And of course, the dogs do what they do. They sniff, pee, run in a circle, and do the same thing for 10 minutes, till they are all stretched out and ready to go. The dogs were winding something. Then one of the males lets out this long bellow and takes off. The other 3 follow him. So my papa and his buddy are on the back of the truck, listening. To get a better understanding, some raccoon hunters don't walk with their dog. They hang back and they wait for that long bellow, which lets the owner know that they are on the trail of a raccoon. A good hunter will wait for that one specific bellow and know the dog or dogs have a raccoon treed and to go to them. In the off-season, they will either reward the dog with something or let them tree for a while. In season, well, we kind of know what happens. So my papa and his buddy are listening for the dogs to tree and waiting. Well, it's silent for a good while. Then, from what Papa said, all hell broke loose. All the dogs started raising Cain all at once, not like they had a coon treed, but like they were fighting something off. So Papa and his buddy grabbed their rifles and start to take off to where they heard the dogs, thinking maybe they found a raccoon on the ground and got to fighting over it. They got about 50 yards in, and all this commotion turned into dogs yelping, sounding like they were hurt. Then, suddenly, everything got quiet. My papa and his buddy got still and started to listen again. They smelled it before they saw anything. Papa said it was the most horrible scent ever. It smelled of dead, wet animal. All of a sudden, they heard a noise. It was one of his buddy's females. She was limping and bleeding bad, her tail tucked between her legs. His buddy grabbed up the dog, and they both headed back towards the truck. However, whatever this thing was, came towards where the truck was. When Papa started the truck and turned the lights on, he got a glimpse of this thing. It was black, hairy, and had big green eyes. Whatever the thing was, it was huge, and the smell coming off of it was absolutely horrid. He said he backed out and tore up the dirt road getting out of there. Unfortunately, the female dog didn't make it. Papa said she had too many wounds, and they were deep. He was shaky, but he showered and managed to get some sleep. He told my granny about what happened the next morning, and she too asked if it had been a bear or a mountain lion. Papa told her there was no way in hell it was either of those things. As big as all 4 of those dogs were, they could have taken a mountain lion no problem. His buddy came up about an hour after he told Granny about it. He wanted to go try and find the other dogs, to see if by chance they made it out alive. Papa said he wished they hadn't gone, because the scene that was left looked like an 80s horror film. As for what killed them, they never could find tracks or anything. As an avid raccoon hunter, well, that was over. He got rid of everything but the dogs. He bred them and sold puppies to make his living after that. Scary part is, my papa and his buddy were hunting like a mile from our house, so this creature was very close. Now I just want to clarify that the trip from the valley where my great papa lived and my papa's on the mountain, as the crow flies, is about a 20-minute trip. To drive it, it would take about 35 or 40 minutes. In other words, you could go across the road to the bluff on the mountain, which would take a 10-minute walk. Then you could look off with binoculars and easily see my great-grandpa's house in the valley. I'm not sure, but I think what was attacking those pets, and what my grandpa saw and smelled, might have been a wampus cat. The glowing eyes, the horrible smell, the quickness and the strength. It all leads me to believe it was a wampus cat. But I didn't see it, so I can't be too sure. But let me know what you think it may have been. Come for the Bigfoot story, stay for the Wampus Cat Massacre, am I right? Sheesh, what a creepy set of stories. Seems like a pleasant night to stay far away from the woods, huh? Good night. Thank you so much for listening to Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails. And you can find my other show, where I narrate scary work-related stories. Search for Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcasting app, or the brand new Eerie.fm, where you can listen to all EerieCast shows. You can even go there and sign up for premium to support us, unlock bonus episodes and audiobooks only for members. You'll also get no ads whatsoever on all EerieCast content. No Spotify nonsense, no Apple nonsense or whatever. Just good old-fashioned horror without any interruptions. But again, that's members only at Eerie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.